Sorry. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the MCE Technical Committee meeting here. Today is May 1st, and I am calling the meeting to order. May we get the roll call, please?
Hercules,
Here.
Lafayette,
Here.
Larkspur,
Here.
Pinole,
Here.
Pleasant Hill,
Here.
Vallejo. Quorum established.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is item number 2, board announcements. Do we have any board announcements today? Anything from San Rafael? None?
None,
Oh.
thank you.
Thank you. Anything here in Concord? None? All right. Next item on the agenda, moving along, is public communications. Do we have any public communications this morning? And these public communications are items that are not on the agenda.
None here in San Rafael, Chair.
Thank you. No, we have no one here in Concord. Anything online?
We have a hand raised by Jody Timms.
Sure.
Good morning, committee members. Jody Timms, 350 Marin. I just wanted to express my concern and questions about the process that is behind the procurement resolution that came 2026-02 before. It's not very clear to those of us in the public kind of how these resolutions get created and put together, if it's solely a staff issue, a project, or in what way the board might be involved. So I don't know if the chair of the technical committee was involved in or had input into that resolution, but I see that in June there will be 3 other options coming forward. And I certainly would hope that the chair of the technical committee, and I assume the finance committee and the executive committee, have some kind of role in the options that come forward. And it's a bit frustrating that that workshop doesn't have a discussion that involves the public in any way. But I just want to express my concern and my sense that the board needs to take more responsibility for and be more involved. Maybe that's happening, but there's not the kind of information provided to us or transparency so that we can feel assured about what the process is behind some of these proposals and then decisions and policies. So I just wanted to express that this morning. And also, well, I'll leave it there for this morning. Thank you very much.
And thank you. Any other public communications?
I see no additional raised hands, Chair.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a report from our Chief Executive Officer, Ms. Wise.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with a quick highlight. The board approved 14% rate reduction, took effect April 1st, and that's delivering a savings of about $12 a month for the average home and about $30 a month for small businesses. We're also continuing to market and enroll income-eligible homes and small businesses in our MCE Cares credit program, which provides an additional savings of up to $25 per month. There are about 28,000 customers currently enrolled and over $500,000 in credits distributed each month. So I was very pleased and excited to get that stat a couple of days ago. So I'm excited to share it with you. That's 28,000 customers getting the MCE Cares credit. So great outcome there. And then I wanted to reference the map that is in front of you all today. We've got copies for the public at the entry area, but I'd encourage you all to take a look at this. We've had this for a while, but just haven't shown it recently. So I wanted to make sure folks are aware of it. What it really illustrates is the scale and geographic diversity of the projects that we've committed to for our long-term power supply. Everything from solar to wind storage, and it's all serving our customers today and into the future. Of our renewable energy supply in 2026, about 75% of that supply comes from long-term contracts. These are the kinds of projects you see on the map, major infrastructure investments that we've secured over many years of operation. And that percentage is actually continuing to grow into 2027 and beyond as more of these projects come online. There are quite a few that we've contracted for in recent years that hit a few delays, but are going to be coming online soon. So we're excited about that. This is really the backbone of how we deliver stable, clean energy and protect our customers from market volatility over time. Next, I'm excited to share that our summer internship program is now open for recruitment. This program is a cornerstone of our community engagement. We really provide hands-on career experience in renewable energy to residents in our service area, particularly those who may not otherwise have access to these opportunities. To date, we've supported 75 interns, so a lot of folks getting a window into our world of work. Some of them have become full-time staff after interning. Applications are open through May 6th, and the cohort is expected to start on June 16th. Outreach is being handled through our website, our community partners, and local networks, but you may know of a youth that is interested in the program. So let us know if you need help finding that information. And for full details, you can look at your monthly board update or visit our website or just reach out directly. The wind field trip I wanted to highlight on May 6th, we're hosting a board field trip to visit an 80 megawatt wind project that we have under construction in Tracy. This is one of the rare chances to actually see one of these projects up close, see how they're built. It's in the process of being built, so you'll see it kind of midway through. It's a pretty different experience than slides and reports, so I think it really gives valuable context for the work that we do and the decisions that we're making here on the technical committee. We're keeping the group small so it can be interactive. If you're interested, sign up. We still have a few slots open for board members. And then also just a quick update on our routing of power supply contracts. While we've been working on updates to our process, we learned that some of our 1 to 5 year contracts signed in recent years were routed to our board chair ahead of our TechCom chair due to outdated routing processes that were still being applied. So we've adjusted the routing process so that that will no longer occur going forward. And I just wanted folks to know. That's it for my report. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from Santa Fe?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from here in Concord? Okay, well, great information. Thank you very much for sharing. We will move on to the consent calendar. We have on the consent calendar approval of meeting minutes from the April 3rd, 2026 meeting. If anyone wants to make a motion.
I move that we approve the minutes from the last meeting.
I will second that.
Okay, so motioned and seconded. I guess we need to do a roll call vote.
Can I get the first and the second, please?
Scats is the first and second is McCormick.
Thank you. Hercules,
Aye.
Lafayette,
Aye.
Larkspur,
Yes.
Pinal,
Aye.
Pleasant Hill.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Hi, Jessica. Director Palmares is here.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Director Palmares, Vallejo.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And the next item on the agenda is committee process for agenda setting. Myself and the vice chair actually had a little bit of discussion over this, and we asked to have it added to the agenda. The goal is for transparency. It's just to help everyone understand how items get added to the agenda. We actually had a question about our processes a few minutes ago. So we looked at most of the cities that make up the tech committee just by coincidence use this process. It's usually at the end of the agenda. On today's agenda, just as sample purposes, it's up on the agenda, but normally this is towards the end. We provided copies of the various cities' process. They use this in my city as well. I'm from the city of Hercules, but it allows for a process for future agenda items to be clearly identified. It's called a two-step process, but there are actually 3 steps. So the process is, just to kind of go over it, you have an agenda item, the director would bring the item forward to ask if people are willing to hear that item. If the item is, and there's a vote, we have to have a majority vote for us. There are 6 members, so it'll be 4 of the 6 or the majority that are present during that meeting. If that happens, it then goes and staff will write a report for a discussion because we can't discuss items not on the agenda. The item would be discussed, and then if the board would like, this is the third step in the two-step process, it then becomes an agenda item where there action could be taken. But it's a clear process. I think it's used by most cities that are represented by the board, and I think it would just be an enhancement to our process, and I hope it will make our meetings more efficient and effective. We'll see if Vice Chair had any comments because he kind of co-worked on this with me, and if not, we'll go to full board.
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Chair. So I agree with you on the efficiency aspect, but I also like to highlight that this is also opportunity for encouraging more discussion, but just making sure that when we have action items or consent items, that those are taken care of, but we are not also discouraging other ideas and opportunities by saying, hey, it's not on the agenda. Like, we want to provide that opportunity, like, hey, we would love to discuss that. We'll bring it up at the end, and there's a 3-step process where we could bring it up and we could have a robust discussion to that later. And so really this is the opportunity is in my mind to encourage more of those conversations that we need to be having. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Senator Rafael, just because. Any comments on this item?
No comments, Chair. I think it's straightforward, and I think it's a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Bringing it back to Concord. Director McCormick.
So yeah, we obviously it's a process we use in Lafayette. Works well. Actually, I will say in Lafayette, what we actually do is that we actually don't do the second part. In fact, we actually do, people just suggest it. And there's just kind of there's more of a casual acknowledgement. Oh yeah, it should happen. But this is actually even a tighter process. So I think it's good. And I agree. I think, we've talked about the tech committee. We're looking for more action, more interest, tackling a wider range of issues. And I think it's a great way to do it.
Thank you. Director Scott.
Yeah, I just had a couple questions. I know we're a subcommittee, obviously, of the full board, and my only concern is if 4 people on this committee direct staff to do something, and we have a board of 34, and I think we need to take into consideration staff time. We do also have this, at the Pleasant Hill City Council that 1 member can suggest something and then majority vote to put it on the agenda. But this is, a full board. We don't do this in subcommittees as far as I know, such as our budget subcommittee or economic development subcommittee. So I'm just wondering if the proper way to do this might be to go through the full board and then have it delegated to the technical committee.
I think it's a good question. I'm going to turn to our staff just to ask if you can share how things currently get to the agenda, because what we would not be doing is, let me be clear, as proposed, we would not be giving staff direction on things that are not technical committee oriented or things that are within our realm. So we're not the executive committee. We're not going to be making those decisions. As I proposed it here, we wouldn't be making larger decisions for the org and having staff do research. It just would sort of funnel our conversations. We get a lot of requests from the public. And there's not really, I think, a way to help organize it. The goal is to help make it easier for staff and the board to go through our meetings. So that's the goal, but I'll ask if staff could just explain how does the item, because some items do appear from conversations, but how do they make it to the board?
Yeah, so currently items can be requested. Often that happens during the board matters at the end of the agenda or the board announcements at the beginning of the agenda. But there is not a voting process that occurs to determine whether to put something on or not. So if, the technical committee recommendation here could be something, if it works well, that the board would want to adopt as a whole. But currently there's nothing in place.
And actually, sorry, I have another comment, and I think I take Amanda's comments seriously. But I think this is also useful because if we decide not to do something, I think it's useful to have the discussion in a recorded session, like, oh, well, we're not going to talk about that because it's not in our scope for whatever reason, as you say. And I think it's actually helpful, as opposed sometimes things that kind of brought up and just kind of die because nobody deals with it. But this actually is a way to kind of talk about it, like, oh, this doesn't make sense. Should it be really go to finance committee? Should it be going to exec committee or others and not being discussed? So I actually find it, I think it'd be useful both to introduce things that we should discuss and actually explain things we're not going to discuss. So to be fair, I understand that this feels a little overkill for a subcommittee, but I think there's so much attention right now on all the subcommittees. I don't mind a little extra process, and maybe we can, relax it later. But this feels like a nice addition, and it may just not end up being that much, right? We're not. This may be just a thing that happens occasionally. We'll have to see.
Chair.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if, someone has a suggestion for agenda item, I would just recommend first discussing it with staff because it might be something that staff already has planned for a future meeting. Or there might be more pressing issues that, there's time deadlines for contracts, for example, that might need to come up more quickly. So I know at least in my city, if I have an idea for staff before I would suggest it, I'm sorry, for the agenda, before I would suggest it at a meeting, I would first talk to the city manager, ask how much staff time would be required, ask if, this is an item that, is already planned for a future council meeting. So I think it would be important to at least touch base with staff before suggesting an agenda item.
Thank you. Director Palmares, or Vice Chair, excuse me.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so there's like that informal rule, like you should talk to staff a little bit beforehand just to kind of get a feeling for their capacity for this. But I will say this, like putting my city council hat on, is that, during the first step or the second step, that's when we all kind of look at each other like, one, is this something that we and also staff can do? And secondly, is this something that should go to the full board versus the technical committee? And conversely, anything that should come up during the board meeting, when you want to request an item, that's when it should also be teased out. Like, is this something for the board or should it be for the technical committee or the executive committee? So those are the multiple opportunities for us to figure out like whether we even have the time to do this, whether we should go through this, and where it should go. So I feel like these mechanisms are inherent in this three-step process. And as long as we're just, being very honest about what we're doing, I think it'll be good for us as a whole.
Thank you. Any other comments? Go ahead. Yes.
I'm happy to move approval of our recommendation of the staff report for the committee process for agenda setting.
And let me just check on public comment and then we can do that.
Okay.
Okay. Any public comment from San Rafael?
There's no public comment here, Chair.
Thank you. We have no members of public here in Concord. Anyone online?
Yes, we have a hand raised by Jody Timms.
Thank you.
Good morning again. Yes, I was going to comment on this earlier just to say I think it's a really good process. I'm actually kind of surprised 15 years into MCE meeting that it's not a built-in part of an agenda, especially for the full board meeting. But it seems to me it can simply be added to the board matters at the end and suggestions for future agenda items. Because as I said, it's not clear that how the board is interacting with staff other than one-on-one meetings or emails back and forth. So I think as a member of the public, it would be good to see, just this discussion that you've had, if people have a suggestion for an item, a discussion of it among yourselves, and a chance for the public to say, I would love to see that on an agenda. And of course, you can disregard that, but it's a chance for more interaction between the board and the staff that's apparent to all of us, and then also for us to be able to weigh in on it. So I think it's an important thing to bring before the whole board and add it to the board meetings and other committees. I wouldn't guess that people are going to be throwing agenda items out constantly, but I think it's an important transparency and dynamic process it's important for us to see right now, because some of us are losing our sense of trust in the upper management and the relationship between the board. Although I do want to say I've seen the board take more responsibility or more speak up more than I have seen to some degree in the past. And I'm just really pleased to see that. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other public speakers?
I see no additional raised hands, Chair.
Okay, thank you. In that case, I'll bring it back to the board. I think we've been able to make comments and questions, so I'm going to just go right to if there's a motion. I think we had one from Pano.
Yep, Chair, excuse me, I'm happy to move approval of the recommendation from the report.
And I'll,
I don't know what's wrong with my microphone. I'm happy to move approval of the recommendation of the report from this item.
and
Okay.
Lafayette seconds.
Okay, so we have, I think we do have a microphone issue. So we have a motion by Murphy, second by McCormick. And then can we have a roll call vote, please?
Hercules,
Yes?
Lafayette.
Aye.
Larkspur,
Yes.
Pinole,
Yes.
Pleasant Hill.
I think the proper venue for this suggesting items is for the full board, so I'm going to vote no.
Vallejo,
Aye.
motion carries.
Okay, thank you very much. And then the next item on the agenda is just to ask, again, this would only be at the end, but since we had this item, if anyone has any future agenda items, we'll start with San Rafael.
Oh, great. Thank you. I do. I have 4 items, if you don't mind. 1, the Corby Best Project. 2, I think it'd be great to bring in some guest speakers to do a deep dive into our energy contracts and process. And specifically, I'm going to recommend Nick Pappas and members of Marine Conservation League. That way it's more of like a tutorial, but also a public hearing where the committee can also hear the concerns from the public, and it's more of a dialogue. Because I think sometimes, the 3-minute public comment time really isn't a whole lot of time for the public to get in all of their comments. And so if we had a more discussion and a dialogue in a committee meeting, I think that might be useful.
Hey, Director, if you could just pause for 1 second.
Yeah.
So I don't know if your city does it, so I'm trying to describe it. So what will happen is if you can tell us the first issue, we can't discuss it because it's not on the agenda, but if you can just tell us what the first issue is, we'll document it and then we'll vote on it. And then you can tell us the second one and then we'll capture that and then vote on it, because you have to give us a little bit of topic, but we'll have a full discussion as to whether or not we're going to do it at a future meeting. So if you could give us again, like the heading.
Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry. I apologize. Okay. Yes. So 1, the Corby Best Project. 2, an energy workshop focused on.
Hold on. The Corby Project, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
Yeah.
Corby Project, and then what about the Corby Project? Give us a little blurb. We can't discuss it, but you can tell us what the topic would be. So the Kirby Project, give me one more sentence on that so we can understand, and we'll vote on if we want to have it come forward. So what about the Kirby Project?
Whether, so whether MCE, okay, so what MCE should do with respect to the Corby Best Project, the contract with the Corby Best Project.
Okay, and I'm putting you at a disadvantage. Let me try this. If I can give a demonstration, I should have done this before. I apologize. Hercules is building a train station, right? One day.
Yeah.
So if I wanted to discuss the train stop, what I might do is say that I'd like to have a future agenda item discussion to discuss the cost of the train station and the timeline for building it, right? And that would give folks on the council time to say yes or no if they want to have that conversation or not. We did hear that maybe we should talk to the staff before we do it, but if you want to do it that way, if that helps you, I just want to make sure we can be clear, but also follow the rules, the rules about discussion at this moment. Did that help?
Okay, how about explore strategic options with respect to the Corby Best Project? Does that give you enough?
Can you be specific? It helps us if you're specific. We can do it that way, but I think most of us aren't clear on what you're asking. So strategic as in alternatives? What do you?
Yes. So basically, there are complaints from the residents that this project is going to harm their community. And so because Solano County is a member jurisdiction of our JPA, should we stay in this stay in this contract? Should we terminate the contract? Is there a third solution where we can work with the community to find a workable solution with respect to this project?
Okay, so if I summarized it as explore strategic alternatives to Kirby project, would that be an fair to, I'm not trying to reduce what you said too much, but would that be fair if I repeated it that
Yes.
way? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so
Thank
then, thank you. So then we're looking, if there's concurrence, to have a conversation to explore strategic alternatives to the Kirby project. So that would be not a decision-making, but just to have a conversation on it, at a future agenda item so we can discuss it in greater detail. To just be clear, you'd have to work with, if we approve it, the directors here, you'd have to work with staff as to how to get that a report to for us to get a deeper dive into what you're asking for. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so I don't know if it's best to do a roll call or if it's because
Just to discuss.
yeah, but we're gonna do we think we should do them one at a time, right?
Yeah, and I wanted to clarify, General Counsel did get back on your question. That is the majority of who's present.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so I think we just, yes, so that's the question. So do you want to do a roll call just so we're clear, or is it okay if we just do a verbal vote for, I guess, for our staff, legal staff?
Do we have legal counsel present?
Apologies, I was consulting on something. Just to clarify, have we done public comment on this item? And I would like to answer the question, but I apologize if you could restate it for me.
So if the question is public comment, in our jurisdictions, at least in mine, we don't do public comment on a future agenda item. If you'd like us to, we can do that, but that's.
I think we should, if we're going to be taking a vote on something, I think we should be asking for public comment before we take that vote. If you wanted to add, no, sorry, we'll go with the single items since there are multiple items.
Thank you. I'm going to pause here for a second and go back to our director over in Centerville.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Would you mind holding this to the next agenda? I think we need to let staff process how they want to.
Okay.
So if
Yeah,
you don't,
sure.
I'm not trying to, I heard your question. I just want to make sure that we keep a process that we can keep doing continuously. So if you don't mind, if you want to hold it to the next meeting, we will work with staff to have a clear process on when we will do public comment, when we won't, et cetera. So it's fair to you in your request and fair to others as well.
Sure. Or do you want me to just submit my 4 items to staff and we can talk about it later? Or I don't know what's the best way for this. I can submit it to legal counsel and we can talk about it at the next
I think
meeting.
some of the recommendations so I think you had, that's your choice because we're all equals here, right? Some of us just are chair, but we're all equals. I think in most of our jurisdictions, I think what we heard from Director Sakatz is that we often go talk to staff just to see what it will entail so we can communicate that out. You aren't required to do that, but that's part of the details I would work with staff with between now and the next meeting, so you'd know ahead of time. But it's your choice. I'm not here to tell you what you can or can't do. I'm just asking if you would be willing to hold it till the next meeting, just so we can have
Yeah, that would be fine. I don't think any of these items are urgent on my list. So,
Okay.
no
Thank you
problem.
very much for that. Thank you for being
Sure.
our test case. Are there any, so if we could just go ahead.
I do just a further clarification when we have that discussion, because I think it's great. Let's kind of articulate and formalize the policy, and then we can start. This could be ways to do it. Are we also? Because I was a little confused there. Were we going to have a discussion about each one? I mean, because if you have a public comment, then do we get asked questions? I mean, this is where
that's why we have a staff, because we
and
don't
I
allow.
kind of agree that when we do it, it's very much it's just kind of more like a courtesy within the council that we do it, and I don't think we're doing. We don't typically do the full public comment stuff. So maybe I think it'd be great for everybody to kind of align on that.
Yeah, I think you and I see it the same way, but again, not every city. I think we had one that didn't do it. So it's good if we clarify that. The goal is for us to work better together. So I think it's best if we get clarity.
Chair, could I just make one comment as well?
Yes.
Yes, I City of Larkspur does it the same way the City of Lafayette does it. It's very informal, and honestly, if just 2 council members want to talk about a certain issue, it just gets agendized, and it's up to the mayor to schedule when the item comes, depending, the mayor works with the staff to figure out when to sequence these items. So that's just, we don't take a formal vote. And we just, if someone raises an issue and somebody else says, yes, I'd like to talk about it, then the mayor will schedule it.
I think we're all in concurrence here, but I want to make sure that our CEO and our legal team kind of have that same understanding. So if you'll give me that grace, if we could just bring it back at the next meeting, are you okay with that?
Yes, I just wanted to concur with what Director McCormick was saying. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Any other comments on this item then? Okay, so I we'll have clarity at the next meeting. I apologize for that. And
Chair, can I jump in just to get clarity so that we can help continue this conversation in a future meeting? And as I understand it, is the approved process that we all just voted on was that everyone would vote as items come up. Is that the request, right? Because if we're going to vote, that's where the public comment comes in. But if it's just a popping up couple of items, multiple directors want it, but there's no official vote on it, then we wouldn't have public comment in that scenario.
okay, let me work offline to make sure we have it clear, and then we'll have it for next meeting.
We'll connect offline. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I know we just had a vote. So the vote that we just had is actually there, so we either have to modify it by vote again, but I will work with staff to get that clarified. I apologize for the confusion that piece added. We call it a vote in our council. Our staff requires that we do that out loud, but it's informal. I do understand the definition you just gave, and I need to work with the team to get that clarified.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
And I just want to say, Chair, if that's okay, that I think that if we vote, we should always vote with roll call because we have virtual folks. And I think it's just probably clearer and easier to always vote with roll call with our committee.
Okay.
That would be required. Yeah, the roll call vote would be required.
Which means public comment would be required. But we have to work on that. But we'll have something for next meeting, I promise. Thank you. Anything else on this particular item? Okay, so moving on, we're going to have our vice chair lead the rest of the meeting. So I'm going to turn this over to Vice Chair Palmeros.
Thank you, Chair. So next on the agenda is going to be number 6, committee process for agenda setting. Oh no, did we just do that? No, we already did that. Sorry. Number 7, integrated resource plan and power procurement. I believe there is a presentation from Dawn.
Yeah, I just wanted to introduce our team that's going to jump in here on the integrated resource plan and power procurement. We're going to hear from 3 of our representatives. First, Sabrina is going to kick us off, and then we're going to hear from Stephen from our Power Resources team, and then John DeLessie from Pacific Energy Advisors. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Sabrina, to kick us off.
Awesome. Thank you, Don. Good morning, directors. Happy Friday. This morning, next slide, please. Sorry. Going to do a little bit of intro. I know we've talked about it a few times on what the Integrated Resource Plan or IRP is, as we are in an IRP year. And we will be bringing the IRP to the board a couple of times in the next couple of months before we submit it to the PUC for certification. So I want to make sure the technical committee and the board get a chance to understand really kind of what we will be presenting, what goes into that long-term planning process, and then turn it over to our procurement experts to talk about a little bit more about, our procurement processes and our thinking on how we do long-term planning for procurement. All right, so at a high level, what is the IRP and really how does it work? So again, the IRP, as we call it, stands for the Integrated Resource Plan. And really at the highest level, this is a process that is overseen by the California Public Utilities Commission and CPUC with the goal of identifying a diverse portfolio of resources that allows California to maintain grid reliability while also supporting California's greenhouse gas reduction goals over a long-term planning horizon, usually 10 to 20 years. And so there's really 2 tracks of the IRP that are kind of always ongoing. It's a cyclical process. It gets updated every 2 years. We're going to focus mostly on the planning track today, but I'll briefly touch on what both tracks are of the IRP. There's a planning track where the CPUC works with stakeholders to build a holistic plan over a long-term period, 10 to 20 years. This year, it's actually a 20-year cycle. So we'll be looking at the long-term planning horizon from 2026 to 2045. And that's called the Preferred System Plan, or the PSP. And that uses, state level forecasts, policy goals, and emission targets. And the CPUC does a lot of comprehensive modeling with its stakeholders to create this really, comprehensive long-term blueprint for the state. Then load serving entities like MCE are allocated our portion of that future looking plan. So we're allocated our reliability and emissions portions of that long-term forward-looking plan. And then we're required to prepare individual long-term plans over that planning horizon to show how we expect to meet our portion of the reliability need and emissions target for the state. And then all of the LSCs subject to CPUC jurisdiction who submit IRPs, the plans are kind of aggregated and evaluated against this preferred system plan. Again, this happens kind of on a rolling basis, so it's cyclical. And ultimately, this flows into the procurement track of the IRP. For investor-owned utilities, their IRPs are actually kind of approved by the PUC, and then that allows them to go procure resources. For CCAs, it's a little bit different, where obviously your board retains procurement authority for CCAs. So what we ultimately procure will not necessarily match what's in that plan, and it will come back to you for approval before we contract for anything. But the CPUC takes all of these plans, aggregates them, and then compares it to its modeling assumptions and determines if maybe it might need to, if the state needs additional procurement. And that's where we've seen things like procurement orders come out of. They usually flow out of the IRP when the CPUC is evaluating what it thinks LSCs are going to build and what they think the state needs. So it's really a really critical planning structure that we engage in this process. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so how does MCE participate in the IRP? So like I said, it's cyclical. It's really always ongoing. There's a policy track of this as well. And so we're regularly engaging in advocacy at the CPUC related to the IRP, advocating for reasonable forecast and planning assumptions, as well as fair procurement obligations and the ability to retain your board's procurement authority for MCE. But in terms of what we actually do every 2 years, right? We, after the CPUC develops that preferred system plan, we are allocated our portion. MCE then works with our procurement staff, our outside consultants, and we develop what's called a conforming portfolio. Again, over this long-term planning horizon, so this 20-year horizon, this go around, that shows how we kind of our blueprint for how we want to demonstrate that we can and plan to meet our share of the statewide reliability need and GHG targets. So it outlines essentially, what resources we might expect to procure, when we might expect to procure those resources, and what volumes. And then it also highlights our emissions factors over that 20-year horizon using the CPUC's emissions modeling. And again, 2026 is an IRP year, so that means we will be coming to the board in late summer, late July to seek approval for our IRP before we submit it to the CPUC. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so yeah, this year, in our 2026 IRP cycle, we will be first bringing kind of a draft IRP to the board later this month, the full board. And what our IRP will ultimately do is demonstrate, again, sorry to be repetitive here, but it will demonstrate how we plan to meet our share of the emissions targets and reliability need over 20 years. So again, it'll say we might expect to procure, this is just throwing out numbers, right? 50 megawatts of solar plus storage by 2030, an additional 100 megawatts of another resource by 2040, things like that. And for this year, importantly, just so you all know, the kind of overall emissions targets that we are required to meet in building that portfolio, we have to hit these kind of two main targets. We have to hit, as a state, 25 million metric tons of GHG emissions by 2035, and then reducing it all the way to 8 million metric tons by 2045. So a real steady decline in the amount of emissions over this 20-year planning horizon. And then importantly, when we are building our preferred conforming portfolio to bring to the board, we'll make sure that that includes all of the state requirements, but also all of MCE's internally adopted policies by the board and board directives. So it'll include our renewable targets as well as things like CPUC procurement mandates. All will be factored into building that portfolio. And then again, most critically, right, I think the MCE's board is the entity that has the ability to approve our IRP. So we want to make sure that we bring it to our board before we submit it to the CPUC. So we seek approval from our board before submitting to the CPUC in August for certification. All right, next slide, please. And I want to touch a little bit, I think this is important on, again, what the IRP does and doesn't do. Again, I'll say it one more time. MCE's procurement authority resides with this board. And however, your board decides to delegate this authority. So anything that we procure in the future, all future contracts for new resources will continue to flow through that approval process. So the IRP is not seeking budget approval. It is not seeking approval for procurement of specific resources. It doesn't determine, specific or exact cost impacts, but it does really directly impact our operational strategy. It can influence and constrain our budget in the future. We really are sending a signal to the state, but also once the plan is adopted by the board, it really is a guiding principle, a guiding light for how we do our procurement. So it's setting out a strategic blueprint of how MCE plans to procure resources over the planning horizon. So it does really, have a real impact on what we expect to procure. So again, it's indirect, it's not one-to-one, but it does theoretically, right? Or not theoretically, it does impact our procurement costs through changes in market dynamics, because we've all sent kind of the signal to what we might expect to procure. So it is really important, but I want to highlight again that it is when we seek approval of the IRP, we aren't seeking approval of specific resources. We're seeking approval of the general strategic plan that we are signaling to the CPUC and the rest of the state that MCE plans to procure prudently and reasonably to meet the state's targets. Next slide, please. And yeah, so these last two slides, really just kind of an example of what was in the last IRP. I did mention that normally this is a 2-year cycle for various reasons, and CPUC delays this. We haven't had an IRP since 2022, so this is a 4-year cycle this year. But for 2022, we developed one conforming portfolio that met all of our assigned emissions requirements, energy and reliability requirements, and was also consistent with MCE's operational and policy guidelines. Next slide, please. And then on this slide, I think it's just sort of highlighting, what we said in our IRP that we had planned to procure. And this is all importantly on a nameplate capacity basis. So we had put in our IRP that we might expect to procure, 265 megawatts of wind and 109 megawatts of geothermal by 2035. And the far right column is just kind of highlighting what we have procured since our last IRP was approved. And for the most part, we've actually exceeded those targets, but you can see, right, it's not a 1-for-1 match, but we have certainly procured towards what was in our IRP. And that's kind of what we'll aim to do in the next go around. All right, next slide, please. Last slide from me. Again, this is an IRP year. We currently are planning to bring sort of a draft IRP, if you will, to the board at the full May board meeting, seeking feedback from the board or directionally making sure the board feels comfortable about the plan that we are putting forward. And then we'll take all of that feedback and go back and create, essentially a final portfolio that we will bring to the board for approval in July of 2026 before we submit it to the CPUC. And again, that July deadline is just critical because we do have to submit our IRP to the CPUC by August 10th. And happy to answer any questions at the end, but for now, I will turn it over to, I believe, John for the next slide.
Yes, I pick it up here. Thank you, Sabrina. I'm John DeLessie with Pacific Energy Advisors, and my colleague Kirby DeSell is also on the line, and he is one of California's preeminent experts in the RPS program, as well as renewable energy markets generally. So if you stump me with any questions, he'll be almost sure to be able to answer them. But let me just start off with there's kind of the regulatory framework, essentially, the major regulatory programs that influence and govern in MCE's procurement. First one is the Renewable Portfolio Standards, or the RPS. This has been around for quite a long time now, probably 20 years or so. And it requires that load-serving entities in California procure enough qualifying renewable energy to meet 60% of their retail sales on an annual basis by 2030. Compliance with this program is measured in multi-year compliance periods. That 60% requirement is sort of the terminal requirement. The effective requirements in each compliance period steadily increase towards that 60% number. We are currently in compliance period 5, and the requirement is around 49% presently in the current compliance period. I will note that MCE reached that 60% target way back in 2017 and has stayed ahead of that. So MCE met that 2030 target 13 years early. Second program that is really relevant and important to procurement is the Resource Adequacy Program. We call this RA. This is a reliability obligation. So it's what it requires is that load-serving entities have contracts in place with qualifying generation equivalent to 118% of the load-serving entity's monthly peak demand. The RA product itself, resource adequacy, is a capacity product. It is measured in megawatts, and so that is separate and distinct from the actual energy supply that MCE or other LSEs use to serve their customers. So what the RA program does is it really provides assurance to the CAISO and to the state as a whole that there is sufficient generation capacity on a year ahead and a month ahead basis to cover peak loads plus a reserve margin. And the program then requires all load-serving entities to essentially bear their fair share of that reliability obligation. Third program, you just heard a bit about from Sabrina, and this is the Integrated Resource Planning Program, or IRP. And this is really directing all load-serving entities to achieve a near zero greenhouse gas emitting portfolio by 2045. So that's kind of the overarching direction that the LSEs are required to head toward. And it also periodically results in incremental procurement orders where the CPUC determines that new capacity is necessary and allocates those obligations to procure and support construction of new capacity to all the load-serving entities. You can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about RPS and the various categories of contract that can be used to comply with the RPS program. There are three categories, I guess, of products or contracts that can be used. MCE only uses the highest value category, which is Portfolio Content Category 1, or PCC 1. There are also PCC 2 and PCC 3. PCC 1 is really sort of the premium category in that There are no limitations on its use for compliance in the RPS program, whereas the PCC2 and PCC3 categories, there are certain limits. You can't meet all of your RPS obligations using those lesser products. PCC1 also is the highest priced product, and that is the one that MCE focuses on in its procurement. Sort of the definitionally, what PCC1 category is that the buyer, it's a bundled product, bundled energy and renewable energy certificate or renewable attribute. And so the buyer receives the bundled energy and renewable attribute from an in-state generator or a generator that is directly connected to California without substitution. So that's sort of definitionally what this product is. The other products, PCC2 is essentially out-of-state renewable generation, where the buyer imports energy in a like amount, but from a non-renewable resource. So that one is a little bit of an odd one, to be honest with you. It is what has historically been called a firmed and shaped product, where LSC might contract for, let's say, wind in the Pacific Northwest. That energy is not actually scheduled into California, but under a PCC2 product, some other energy must be scheduled into California. So that's why they call it firmed and shaped. Again, we're not buying any of that. PCC3, this is the classic sort of unbundled RECs that folks are probably familiar with. This does not involve purchase of energy. It purely involves purchasing of the renewable attribute, the unbundled renewable attribute. It's quite limited in terms of how much of that can be used for compliance. It's 10% of the RPS can be met through PCC3. MCE does not buy that product either. Move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so MCE uses a mix of contract types to build a balanced portfolio. Really, the cornerstone of the portfolio is long-term power purchase agreements. So these are usually with new build renewable generators. They are long-term, meaning greater than 10 years, oftentimes 15, 20, sometimes even 25 years terms. They are the primary tool for financing new renewable energy construction in the state. This is the mechanism by which developers are able to get financing, on the strength of this long-term power purchase contract. These do provide benefits to the portfolio, but also come with some risk. And so in terms of benefit, first and foremost, they give you secure access to renewable energy. And as renewable energy may become increasingly scarce, as all LSEs need to essentially move towards 100% renewable content, or at least carbon-free content by 2045, long-term contracts secure that source of power. They also have a stable contract price, right? So there is some degree of cost stability afforded by these contracts. But there are risks, and one of the most important risk is that the underlying energy value, or the revenue that the project will earn by scheduling into the CAISO, is variable. And depending on the location of the project and potential congestion on the grid, that price can be quite low. It can be negative. So there is the risk that the net cost of the long-term fixed price PPA is actually higher than anticipated when the contract was signed, right? So if you pay, let's say you have a contract price of $50 a megawatt hour, and then you think that, well, the energy value is going to be worth 30, but in reality, the energy value is worth 10. Well, the net cost of that contract is quite a bit higher than you thought going into it. So there are definitely pros and cons to the long-term contracts, but these are definitely sort of the cornerstone, the foundation of the renewable energy portfolio. In this year, 2026, just to give you a number here, a little over 77% of the renewable energy that is purchased by MCE it comes from these long-term contracts. Then there are short-term PPAs. These would be also fixed price contracts. These are a little less common. Typically these are like a bridge type of a contract where a generation project may have a long-term PPA with another buyer, but there's sort of this initial term where the contract doesn't start. That's one example of what we've seen before. Or on the back end, a project that might be coming off of a long-term PPA and wants to re-up. Maybe the original buyer doesn't want to. Sometimes you'll see a kind of a shorter term fixed price PPA in those situations. Not that common. And then there's the index plus contracts. So index plus refers to the pricing structure of the contract, really nothing else. So index plus can be typically short term, usually shorter term, 1 to maybe 5 years, but they don't have to be. And in some cases, they can be long term. But what they are is the pricing term, the contract price floats with an underlying index. So essentially you would agree in the contract that the contract price will be a fixed adder, let's just call it $20 a megawatt hour, plus the nodal price at the generator location. So the total contract price floats with that nodal price, right, which changes hour to hour. So that's why they're termed index plus, because the total contract payment is not fixed. It floats. Now, one thing that I will note as it relates to the long-term PPAs, because of the really the buyer is taking that long position, that energy position, there's a great deal of due diligence required to evaluate those project opportunities. And these contracts, these long-term PPAs, take many months to negotiate. They're all sort of custom because it's very important that power flow studies are done, that other due diligence is done, so that the buyer can be as confident as possible that this project isn't going to be, for instance, subject to tremendous amount of congestion, right, which would result in higher costs for the project. Index plus contracts really have the advantage of they can be done very quickly without a whole lot of due diligence, because the buyer is really not taking that financial position associated with the underlying energy. And so it's a much more flexible contract structure. And that's why it's oftentimes a shorter term contract, because let's say we get in halfway through the year, we see that, we had a hot summer, our loads are higher than we thought, we need more renewable energy to hit our targets. These are a great way to fill that need without the need to really study the project that's delivering the energy and what the congestion risk might be, et cetera, et cetera. So they provide a lot of flexibility in the portfolio. Go to the next slide, please. A little bit more on Index Plus. I think I probably covered a fair amount of this one, but I will say that really the difference between a fixed price contract and an Index Plus contract is really one thing. And kind of the name gives you a pretty good indication of what that difference is. It's simply, in the one, the contract price is fixed, and the other, the contract price floats. In both types of contracts, there are specified renewable generators that are supplying the energy. In both types of contracts, the buyer is taking title to the underlying energy and is receiving the CAISO market revenue as a credit or an offset to their contract payment. It's just that with Index Plus contracts, that CAISO credit exactly offsets the index portion of the contract payment. So the net invoice is always going to be equal to that agreed upon fixed premium. That's not the case with a fixed price contract because the net invoice is going to be the difference between the fixed price and whatever the generator earned in the market, right? So that premium in a fixed price contract actually floats, whereas the premium in an index price contract is fixed. So that's really the only difference between the two types of contracts. There can be other sort of, I guess, commonalities in the sense that index contracts are typically short term, whereas PPAs are typically long term, and that can have implications for your view on are these helping to promote new construction and that type of thing. But it really has nothing to do with the pricing structure. That really is related to the term. We can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so resource adequacy. Again, this is a program that is designed to promote grid reliability by ensuring that there's enough physical generating capacity on the grid to meet peak load requirements plus the reserve margin. As I said before, the RA contracts are in megawatts and are separate from the power supply that MCE buys. So, essentially, the requirement is that MCE needs to cover a share. It's a sort of a load ratio share of the overall capacity requirements that are necessary for the grid. What a seller of a RA contract takes on then is an obligation to the CAISO, to the California Independent System Operator, that they will be available to run if required. So it's the primary obligation of a resource adequacy generator is to the CAISO, but the load serving entity needs to contract with its share of these resources just to essentially, like I said, do its share to support grid reliability. Each generator has it's termed on this slide an RA credit. The more technical or correct term for it is net qualifying capacity. So this is an amount of megawatts that the generator is good for or can count against resource adequacy obligations. And this net qualifying capacity can be quite a bit less than the actual capacity of the generator, the nameplate capacity of the generator. And that is especially true for solar and wind resources. For a solar resource, for instance, in the month of September, it might have a net qualifying capacity overall of, like 1/3 of its actual nameplate capacity, whereas a fossil fuel resource would have a NQC very close to its 100% of its nameplate capacity. So in this sense, as it relates to contributions to RA, renewables are at a pretty significant disadvantage. The exception would be baseload renewables like geothermal. That's pretty much close to a 1-for-1, similar to fossil. And other sort of baseload renewables like biomass or biogas also have high NQC ratings relative to nameplate. Batteries right now have high NQC ratings, essentially 1-for-1. And so that's good, but there are indications that over the next several years, those NQC ratings are going to get cut pretty dramatically. So we're kind of keeping our eye on that, but to the extent that those get cut, then it really limits what's available for RA. In order to meet the total RA obligations through renewables and battery, particularly if the battery and QC ratings get cut, you would need many, many multiples of your peak load through these types of projects because of the low NQC rating. So it really does pose a challenge when people start thinking about, well, we'd like to get natural gas out of the RA mix, and that is exceedingly difficult if the NQC ratings of battery storage gets cut. And we can move to the next slide and talk about this a little bit more specifically. Presently, MCE does have natural gas resources as part of its RA portfolio. MCE does not buy energy from natural gas resources, so I want to just kind of keep that distinction out there. There is quite a bit of new batteries being constructed for MCE. So there's 860 megawatts of new nameplate generation between batteries and renewable resources that are under development for MCE, so under contract but not yet built. If the battery ratings stay steady, then that can displace the bulk of the natural gas RA. However, if battery storage is cut as we expect, then we're kind of in a situation where we take 2 steps forward and maybe 1.5 steps backward, and there may be a continued need to keep the fossil fueled resources in the RA portfolio. Just to give you a sense of where things stand today, looking at this upcoming September, which is the peak month, in the peak hour, which is hour ending 18, about 38% of the RA in that peak hour will be met with carbon-free resources. So that would be primarily the wind and the battery storage resources that MCE has under contract. By 2031, because of all the new storage coming online, that percentage could move to about 100%. But again, that assumes no cut in the NQC ratings with storage, which I think is probably going to happen. So again, it's going to be a continuing challenge if the goal is to move towards an RA portfolio that doesn't include any natural gas resources. We'll move to the next slide, please. Okay, so talking a little bit about short-term contracts and why they matter. Currently the fixed price renewable contracts do not meet the entirety of MCE's renewable energy needs that are required to meet its commitment to the 60% content for the light green product and the 100% content for deep green. So if short-term contracts were not used, then MCE would fall short of its commitments to its customers, and would also significantly would have a much significantly higher greenhouse gas emissions coefficient. So as an example, the most recent power source disclosure reports are from 2024, and MCE's carbon CO2 equivalent was extremely low in 2024, 1 pound of CO2 equivalent per megawatt hour. If MCE didn't do any short-term contracting that year, that greenhouse gas emission coefficient would have been 606 pounds CO2 equivalent per megawatt hour. So, without the short-term contracts, I think the big issue there would be just not being able, if you make a commitment to your customers that you're buying a light green product that's going to be 60% renewable, if short-term contracts were not purchased, then that simply could not have been delivered upon. And of course, the emissions rate would have been quite a bit higher as well. Go to the next slide, please. So additional reasons why short-term contracts are important. I'd say, the overarching benefit is the diversity and the flexibility that short-term contracts provide. In managing energy portfolio, there are just a lot of uncertainties that come with the territory. Certainly, load can change, due to weather, due to potential customer departures. If, for instance, direct access were to be reopened. Wasn't too long ago when the COVID pandemic rolled through, significantly reduced the amount of load that MCE served and had us wondering, how much load we are going to be serving in the future. So things can change certainly on the load side, and there's only so much you want to lock down through long-term contracts, which do not kind of have that same level of flexibility as the short-term contracts. There's also the opportunity for technological improvement over time. And I think particularly with battery storage, we're still in the relatively early stages there, and prices are fairly high. And I think that if we have a 20-year time horizon, certainly we're going to see technological improvements in battery storage and cost reductions as well. So it's important to have some room, right, for new technologies that may be developed or improvements in cost and performance of these generating and storage technologies. Another factor here is when we do a long-term PPA with a new build, that's a development project, and there oftentimes are delays in terms of when that project actually comes online. So, it's important to have that flexibility to fill in the short term if a project that you were counting on gets delayed. And then lastly, it's good risk management practice to have a diversity of contract terms in the portfolio so that we're avoiding a situation where there's a huge drop off, say, once the contracts expire and they're all sort of lined up at the same time, that there's a huge drop off in the amount of power that's under contract. And so we're now sort of forced into the market in concentrated purchases at any one point in time. It's good practice to spread those purchases out over time so that you're not overly dependent on market conditions that may exist at one sort of point in time. You can go to the next slide, please. The last topic, I think, for me today is the energy hedging program. So, what are the energy hedges and why are they used? Well, first off, hedging is a financial concept. And so MCE uses hedges. They're fixed price contracts that offset exposure to CAISO spot prices. So basically, the reason that they are needed and used is to reduce the variability in MCE's overall power costs. What these contracts look like is that they're a fixed price agreement where the seller agrees to schedule through the CAISO an inter-scheduling coordinator trade for the hourly volumes that are specified in the contract. Okay, so what does that mean? An inter-scheduling coordinator trade, or an IST, it's an optional settlement service that the CAISO provides to financially settle bilateral trades between two scheduling coordinators. So the way this works is that the sending scheduling coordinator will be charged by the CAISO the day ahead hourly price for the volume that it sent to the receiving scheduling coordinator, and the receiving scheduling coordinator receives the CAISO credit, the hourly day ahead price, for that energy that was transferred. So CAISO sees this as a financial mechanism. They're very clear that ISTs do not change generation dispatch. They do not change market operations or the optimization, and really have no physical characteristics. They're purely a financial settlement mechanism that the CAISO performs. So MCE uses these contracts very similar to what a purely financial contract would look like, a fixed for floating swap contract. And it's just used to offset the exposure to the CAISO day-ahead price that would otherwise exist without these hedges. And the reason that there's exposure is anytime there's a difference between the MCE's financial position, so that would be MCE's load that is settled at the CAISO at the DLAP price, the default load aggregation point price. That's what MCE is charged for load at CAISO. And if there's a difference between that settlement and the supply settlement, the fixed price supply settlement, so all the fixed price contracts are credited, or they earn at CAISO the price at that particular project location. Where there's a difference hour to hour, that creates exposure for MCE. And so that's what these hedges are designed to offset. Index plus contracts, because they don't provide a financial position, they just provide that physical position. Those are not accounted for, or they are ignored when it comes to the hedging program. So that's where, it can look like MCE's buying energy under an index plus contract and also buying a hedge to cover it. It almost looks like you're buying 2 times as much energy as you need. That's because we're using the hedges as a financial hedge to offset the market risk associated with the floating index. And I think that is the extent of my section. I will hand this over to Stephen, who will talk a bit about kind of what the future holds, what MCE is doing in terms of new construction, and kind of where we're going from here.
Thanks, John. Good morning, members of the committee. And so, for these last few slides, I just want to bring it back to our long-term contracts and highlight a few things. So currently, our long-term PPAs make up over 75% of our contracted renewable energy for 2026. This is based on our current load projections. Our long-term PPAs have spurred over 46 megawatts of new renewable projects in MCE's service territory. That's largely been through our feed-in tariff program. And we've also spurred new development of over 1,100 megawatts of new renewables and storage in California. And this includes 638 megawatts signed just in the last 5 years. As John mentioned, these do take quite a bit of diligence and a lot of time to make sure that these projects are sufficiently de-risked to bring into MCE's portfolio. There's a lot of moving parts in the costs and the benefits that go into these projects. But nevertheless, we continue to sign a steady amount of these contracts per year. We've also signed 7 long-term contracts totaling 774 megawatts of storage. These are helpful because they can shift renewable energy to peak hours, and they contribute to our portfolio of clean RA resources, which John mentioned in his slides. So next slide, please. I'll just talk a little bit about our path forward. While we're making steady progress in building out this long-term portfolio, we do face considerable headwinds to find cost-effective contracts. These challenges include interconnection and permitting backlogs, supply chain and financing risks that have been driving PPA costs up for long-term contracts, and we have rapidly changing grid conditions and changing regulatory rules that all impact the value of these resources. So, this is making the diligence process quite a bit more complex and is requiring definitely more staff resources as we go out to contract these long-term PPAs. So our approach remains to maintain a balance of long and short-term contracts, continuing to prioritize these long-term new build renewable contracts, and then using short-term contracts where necessary to manage the risks that John laid out and serve as a bridge until more of our long-term projects come online. We will also continue to invest in resources that provide clean RA and advocate for policy and regulatory changes that help advance clean energy development. And last slide is just a quick next step slide. We thought this would be, based on the content today, a good opportunity to highlight that our procurement team is in the process of planning to launch our long-term open season process. That is our annual solicitation process for new long-term PPAs. As the name suggests, we'll be seeking a range of renewable technologies to find projects that will meet MCE's needs. And historically, these open seasons have been the primary mode of finding our new renewable and storage projects that we've now contracted for under our long-term PPAs. We'll have more details to share about our open season process in future meetings. Right now, we're targeting a mid-June launch date, and this is one of our biggest efforts that we undertake on the procurement team. So we will be looking forward to coming back to bring more information about that to your committee and the board, but just wanted to flag for your attention that that's currently in the works. So thank you. I think that's the last slide for us. Thanks to the other presenters, and we'll pause here for questions.
Thank you so much. I'd like to, I don't know if it's the way we usually do things, but I'd like to put it to public comment first, and then we'll go to the board or the committee. Do we have anyone?
Yes, we have a member of the public here in San Rafael.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm Robert Miller, Marine Conservation League. I'm responding to slide 15, why short-term contracts matter. We're told that MCE reported emissions in 2024 would have been 606 pounds of CO2 equivalent per megawatt hour without short-term renewable energy contracts. And they were only 1 pound with short-term contracts. I calculated that with these short-term renewable energy purchases, MCE reduced its reported emissions by about 1.5 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent. But did MCE's purchases of short-term renewable energy reduce California's greenhouse gas emissions by 1.5 million metric tons? Well, in the short run, there's a fixed amount of short-term renewable energy that's available on the grid. If MCE's reported emissions go down by 1.5 million, reported emissions for another entity or other entities goes up by 1.5 million metric tons of CO2. So California emissions are unchanged. This is a zero-sum game that is known as reshuffling. So it does not reduce California's greenhouse gas emissions. And it also doesn't help developers build new long-term renewable energy capacity because they depend on signing long-term renewable energy PPAs to get loans to build that capacity. This all comes at a huge cost. We calculate probably 200 million was purely discretionary, and it could have funded greenhouse gas emissions reduction efforts that were far more effective. Thank you.
Do we have another person who wants to comment from the public?
No additional comments here in San Rafael, Chair. Vice Chair.
No worries. And do we have anyone here in Concord?
None in Concord, and I see no raised hands online, Vice Chair.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I'm going to reserve my comments for last. Does anyone from the committee would like to comment or ask any questions? My understanding is just looking at the slide deck that there is no decision or action to be made, but I think we do need to talk about this at least a little bit. Anyone from Senator Fell?
Yes, thank you, Chair, or Vice Chair Palmares. Mr. DeLacy, I just wanted to, first of all, thank you, Mr. DeLacy. It's good to see you again. I wanted to ask you about these Index Plus contracts. I've been able to review several of these contracts that MCE has signed in particular. And in all of these Index Plus contracts, what I see is that the buyer retains the rights to the energy, the buyer schedules the energy to the grid, and that the money that changes hands is strictly for and only for the fixed price renewable energy credit. And so when you're talking about, the floating price of energy, the two net together, basically they net each other out. What the seller receives in the market is floating. So the buyer, in MCE's case, they would be paying the floating price, and the two net each other out. And therefore, the only money that actually changes hands is the fixed price for the REC, which in certain instances, varies from $20 per megawatt hour to about, $80 or $90 at its peak per megawatt hour. So I guess I'm a little confused of, the characterization of these Index Plus contracts as MCE taking title to the energy, because very clearly it states in these contracts that the seller retains the right and that the seller is scheduling the energy into into CAISO, and that MCE has no idea when, the seller is scheduling the energy, and that MCE is just paying the REC. So can you address this, please?
Yes. So I think you've described the financial settlement, accurately, right? So essentially you think of the payment as this index piece plus the fixed adder, right? Let's call it $20 plus the nodal price that the generator is going to earn. The seller schedules the resource into the CAISO. Because there's a scheduling coordinator, they get the money from the CAISO, and then the contract states that money is compensating for the index portion of the purchase, right? So effectively, yes, it nets out so that it equates to that fixed adder, and that's by design. But that's really no different than, it's in a sense, it's not different from with the same exact situation, but it's a fixed price contract. What would happen there is if the seller is the scheduling coordinator, which certainly is common. A lot of times MCE is the scheduling coordinator for its PPAs, but not always. We have some contracts where the seller is a scheduling coordinator. The seller, again, gets that CAISO the revenue from the CAISO, and credits that revenue against the fixed payment that MCE makes, right? So it's still the same sort of crediting mechanism. It's just that the contract price in the fixed price case, let's say it's a fixed amount of like $50, so that net amount is going to change month to month, based on the underlying value of the energy. But there's no real difference in terms of taking title or whether you're buying the energy or not. It's really just what is the pricing structure, right? So let me put it this way: with a fixed price contract, we don't know what the net cost is going to be, right? We don't know what the net cost is going to be because we know the contract price, let's say, is $50, but we don't know what the CAISO revenue is going to be that's going to credit against that 50. Could be $30, so our net's 20. It could be minus 10, so our net cost is 60. That's the piece that's unknown. With an Index Plus, we always know that net cost is going to be 20, right? It's always going to be 20. So there's, in a way, it's less risky, but it poses a different set of risks. The nice thing about Index Plus is we can easily hedge out the market exposure through the hedge contracts. It's a very efficient way of doing things. We also don't need to, as I said earlier, do a ton of due diligence about the source of the supply an index plus, right? Because we're not exposed to the congestion and the chance that the nodal price at that generator might go negative, where we would have real concern about that if we were under a fixed price contract, because that's directly going to flow to our bottom line. So they're different in terms of the pricing structure, but like I said, to me that's the only real difference.
Well, can I press on that a little bit? Because under the Index Plus, as we just established, the floating energy price gets netted out. So what is MCE's exposure then? All you're paying is the fixed price for the REC. So what are you hedging against? If the fixed price of the REC is fixed and it's known, and you're netting the floating energy price, against what the seller is receiving in the CAISO market, there is no market exposure there to MCE. So what exactly are you hedging in that instance?
Hedging the exposure on the load side. So, let's just think of an example where, all of MCE's contracts were index plus, right? So we would just, when we look at our CAISO settlement, we're going to have all of our load is going to be charged at the hourly price, the hourly day ahead price from CAISO. Changes every hour, changes every day. We have no control over that. Our supply, right, because we're netting the underlying energy value against the contract payment. We're not really getting any hedge value with the index we're not getting any hedge value with the index contract, right? We're not taking a financial position with the index contract. So that's where the exposure comes in. So now if we think of a fixed price contract, that actually does provide hedge value. If, to the extent that, let's say, the other extreme example, 100% of our supply was under fixed price contract. The delivery profile of the contract exactly matched our hourly load, and the supply was at the same location as our load, which it technically can't be, but let's just assume it is, because you don't have, in that case, we wouldn't have congestion. In that case, then we would already be fully hedged, right? So the supply itself would be providing that financial hedge. So that is a distinction with the index price contract, is you don't get any hedge value. But that's really a financial concept, and so it's, I think when people talking about you're not getting the energy, well, you are getting the energy. I mean, it's like legally you're taking title. It's just the way that you pay for it is different, and so. I mean, that's really the only difference.
If I may, this is Kirby Ducell here with
Yeah.
the Energy Advisors. I'd also add that in both cases, and in this instance, when I refer to both cases, I'm referring to index plus as well as fixed price contracts. The metered electricity that flows from the renewable generating asset is gathered by an entity called a Qualified Reporting Entity, or QRE. That meter data is provided to REGIS, the Western Renewable Energy Generating Information System, which is the clearinghouse in the Western US for renewable energy certificates. And it's run through an algorithm to test whether that is legitimate based on the characteristics of that specific generating asset. And only after that test is passed, if you will, are the RECs created and made available to the seller, which then can transfer those RECs to the buyer. So there's kind of another layer beyond that, just as far as the legitimacy of the production. And I know that wasn't necessarily the question at hand, but I wanted to offer that up just to make sure that everybody understood that whether we're talking about an index plus contract or a fixed price contract, that process, that test, if you will, related to the production and ultimately the creation of the renewable energy certificates that's based on that production is in place in both cases.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we're not disputing the renewable, renewable, I don't know what the word is, the veracity of the renewable content of these RECs. I mean, that's not what we're disputing here. And we also understand that we only buy PCC1 renewable RECs, not PCC2 and 3. So that's very clear. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking about, one, I think that with these index plus contracts, the money that is under a fixed price contract, MCE is buying the energy, the underlying energy. You're paying for it. It's in the contract. And so with these index plus contracts, all you're buying is the rec because the energy price is floating. So that signals to me that we are just purchasing the attribute, as Kirby was saying, is, there's a whole process to attest to the fact that these recs are truly renewable before they're actually, they're registered, and then and that the seller is actually able to sell them to a buyer. I totally understand that. But the question is, I guess the question is, on these hedges, when you're talking about the CAISO hedges, I don't see what you're hedging against the short-term index plus contracts. And I think also what's happening is on the CAISO hedges, you're having to buy energy off the grid in the day ahead, the short-term market. And so that's the energy that you are buying. And so that, in many respects, is unspecified energy when you're buying that energy off the grid. And that's why you need to go out and buy these short-term index plus contracts with the RECs to offset the energy that you're buying off, the short-term energy that you're buying off of the CAISO grid.
So the hedge contracts, I mean, there's no physical energy behind those, right? So this is just a settlement mechanism at CAISO. So I mean, there's two types of ISTs. So there's the ones we're talking about are the we call them AP node ISTs. So these are the settlements at the trading hub, right? So at NP15, you just have two parties agree, we're going to have this trade, these volumes, and CAISO will settle that for you. If you look at the way the CAISO describes these ISTs, they're very clear that they don't impact anything physically, right? So it's not that we're really buying grid energy through these hedges. We're just looking for the financial settlement aspect of that, right? We want that fixed for floating swap, the equivalent of a fixed for floating swap. So, and the reason why do we have that exposure? Well, one of the reasons we have that exposure at CAISO is because anytime we have load in an hour that is not met by fixed price supply, that creates exposure. That would mean that delta is going to be charged at the CAISO hourly price. So now, what causes the discrepancy there between the load and fixed price supply? One would just be our fixed price renewables don't deliver it in the same way that our load profile is, right? When we have solar, classically solar doesn't produce at night, even though we have load at night. The other would be some of our contracts are index plus, right? So those aren't fixed price at all. So they're not really offering any of that hedge value, and that's why we that's part of the hedging volume, is to cover the index price contracts. So that's it's not all of it, but that's part of it. I'm sorry, I've lost your audio.
Sorry, I'm going to try and simplify things. Let's disregard any hedging, but do we buy energy off of the CAISO in the day ahead or spot market?
Do we buy energy?
Do we buy energy?
Well, yeah, to the extent that we don't have supply.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. So that's what I'm getting at. When we buy that energy, is that specified power or unspecified power?
From CAISO, it's all CAISO energy, unspecified. You don't know
unspecified.
what it is.
Okay. Yeah. So it's unspecified, which is fossil. Is that correct? Is that
No. It's you don't know what it is. It's okay. It's grid energy. It's a mix of whatever's on the grid.
Right. So, but we can assume it's unspecified and it's probably fossil. If you're buying it at 2 a.m. on a winter early morning, it's probably fossil. Is that fair?
I don't think so. I think it could be wind at that time. It could be fossil. It could be geothermal, which also operates around the clock. I think drawing the conclusion that unspecified power is necessarily fossil is inaccurate. And I actually look forward to the hourly emissions accounting because I think it'll probably demonstrate in many hours of the day the emission coefficient is much lower than folks understand it to be, and that the resources that are providing that power are not always fossil the way they're assumed to be.
Yeah, so that's great because that's what I'm driving at is if we're looking at 24/7 accounting, I would like to understand as a board member, what is our actual emissions and what is our renewable content? And on slide 15, where you show 606 pounds of CO2 emissions, what I'm interested in as a board member is if you don't buy any RECs or GHG free or carbon free attributes, so assuming no attributes and no RECs, what is the emissions and renewable content of MCE's portfolio? That's the question. And is that the 606 pounds of carbon that we're seeing here?
That would have been it in 2024 with no short-term purchases. So those were presumably all index plus. So I think that's basically getting to your question.
Yeah. Okay, so if we had no index plus, no GHG free attributes, no carbon free attributes, our emissions would have been 606 pounds.
Yeah.
So that's fossil, correct?
No, it's I mean, fossil emits more than that, but and so the essentially what the accounting, how it would work is that, if you didn't report the specified purchases that were done under an index plus contract, so you strip that out, which of course is, okay, we'll leave that at that. Then the remaining amount, or that amount, would be treated as unspecified power in the power content accounting. And then unspecified power is assigned an emissions rate that is roughly equivalent to a natural gas generator. So it's not necessarily the case that unspecified emissions is natural gas, as we just kind of went through. It's by definition, you don't know what it is. But in terms of the current emissions accounting, unspecified power is essentially treated as if it's natural gas for purposes of calculating the emissions. And Kirby, if I got that wrong,
No,
please
I would only
clarify.
add that emission coefficient that's ascribed to unspecified power has remained unchanged for the better part of 20 years. I think it's known to be not technically accurate. And I think that's part of the reason that lots of folks are looking forward to hourly emissions accounting, because there'll be a more concerted effort to calculate more accurately what emissions are on an hourly basis, as opposed to applying this legacy / outdated emission coefficient, just so we can have something in the mix for the sake of the calculus.
And if I might jump in, and this is something, John or Kirby, you may want to correct if I get anything off here, but in these conversations that happen with other CCAs, I think one of the elements that's often pointed out and that's important to keep in mind is that while the energy that we purchase for our customers is specified energy, that is what we report. It's what we purchase for our customers. It's what we're required to report. We're actually not allowed to report anything different from what the state requires under the power content label. And that is our power content label captures the specified energy purchases that we make. And if we were to try to also report unspecified purchases that are available on the grid, we would essentially be double counting those resources, because the grid is a zero-sum game. You can't have extra energy floating around. It all has to go somewhere. And our power content label is accounting for essentially 100% of the load of our customers. So that specified energy is what we're required to report. And anything different from that, say, trying to also add in any unspecified power, would essentially be double counting, and it would not provide the apples to apples comparisons that are needed for statewide accounting purposes. But Kirby or John, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, you made a great point, Don, and thanks for bringing it up. I think, first and foremost, and while it's not the question at hand, MCE is always following the state's power source disclosure regulation and how it presents information related to its power purchases. And as you pointed out, Don, only specified source purchases are reflected in the inventory that MCE annually submits to the California Energy Commission. And it's only through the underlying contracts, and then, of course, also through the renewable energy certificates that are conferred through those contracts, whether long-term or short-term, that we have information to fill in that report. And so everything that we've done to date through the annual power source disclosure reporting process is reflective of the specified source energy procurement carried out by MCE, and that will continue to be the case, whether the state incorporates these adaptations to address hourly nuances and so forth. So yeah, thanks again. That's absolutely accurate, Don.
Great. Kirby, just a follow-up question. I mean, if we did not count our RECs, then would we have to report unspecified power on our power content label?
Through the chair, real quick. I'm so sorry, Mr. Kirby. I'm gonna have to go, Mr. Chair. So I don't know if we have quorum, but I will have to go. I'm just noting
Yeah.
for the record.
Sorry, I have to interrupt. Yeah. So Director Murphy has to leave, and at that point, we're gonna break quorum. I also have questions and comments, but I'm encouraging my fellow committee members to reserve those for the next meeting. Email them to the appropriate staff. I'm going to as well, and I also invite everyone to have any issues to come to me, and we can have an offline conversation about this stuff later. But unfortunately, we have to break quorum now, and then we will have to end the meeting, unfortunately. So. Yeah, so I guess you're gone. All right, thank you.
Chair,
We're going to turn right now.
Chair, could I
Yes.
interrupt? Can I just identify which members are leaving at this time and who's remaining?
So Director Murphy is leaving. Director Zakat left a few minutes ago.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And if I could just do a pitch for the June 5th procurement workshop, where we're going to be able to talk about this again, and we're going to encourage the board to watch this recorded session in advance of the procurement workshop so that we can build on it rather than repeating it. But I really appreciate everyone's patience listening through all that.
I appreciate the opportunity. Okay, everyone have a good afternoon. Thank you.